My name is not Lloyd Grossman, but if it was, I'd be saying, who lives in a house like this? Now follow me, because this is an absolute delight. And I can assure you it's not me that lives in a house like this, but it's a very good friend of mine. And we've been very privileged to have the luxury of coming and visiting his beautiful property. Now, this is over on the wrong side of the Pennines in Lancashire, just outside a small town called Ramsbottom, in an area locally known as Upper Ramsbottom. And behind my good friend's beautiful bungalow is this amazing little paradise. What a haven. Now, what you got to say about that? It's absolutely fantastic. And when I came through this morning, there were a deer sat on that back little hill there, and I just couldn't believe my eyes. And if I had to wake up to this every morning, I think I'd dive and gone to paradise, I can tell you. It's almost like a mirage. So let's have a look at the fishery. So, I can't believe what you've got nestled here, right in this nookie hole at the top of a cul-de-sac. This is an old set of mill ponds. It's fed up from, I think it's called Scoutmore, I might be wrong, the locals will put me right on that, which is all part of the Pennines, and the river runs from the top of the hill and creates what would have been a series of mill ponds from an old mill that's now gone and replaced by houses. But this little beauty has been retained and is just nestled in this little valley, and well, what can you say? Beautiful. Typical northern, stone everywhere, lovely backdrop. It's a bit cool, but it's still an absolute beautiful place. So I know for a fact that this fishery's got an ABC stocking programme, which I didn't really understand until I came and actually met the family again this morning. I just said, tell me why it's ABC, and he said, anything but carp. So for the purists and natural anglers amongst you, you'll be pleased to know that there's no carp in here, but there is. Bream, skimmers, tench, ide, perch, roach, and I think a couple of ornamental shabunkin type characters that people have disposed of when the family weren't looking. But it is a beautiful place, and I'm sure that you'll agree it's a little bit unusual, and we've had the privilege to come and put our tackle down on the owner's favourite wooden staging. So let's go and have a look and see if we can catch a few fish while we're here. I plonked myself down here just outside the living room window on Roger's favourite peg. We sat out on a nice wooden jetty, and I've had a little plumb around, and Andrew informed me that it was about 5 foot deep, about as high as my forehead, he said, because he is 6'2", and obviously he loves looking down on small people like me. However, I plumbed it up and he were quite right. I had to check though, because you never know, he's a bit of a trickster. And he tells me that we need to target the bream and skimmers that are here, and I've gone 13 metres for those out in the middle of the lake. And it's winter, it's really, really cold, the water's freezing, we've had ice lately, it's not so long since this place was actually froze over. So I'm thinking that all the fish will be huddled around in the middle. So I've put what he called, you need to put a big peg in. So I've actually fed 2 bowls of ground bait with a few casters and an odd pinky, an odd fluoro pinky. And then I've plumbed up a little bit shorter where there's still 5 foot of depth, because it's quite an even bottom. And I'm going to loose feed some maggots. I've kicked it off with a small bowl of ground bait. I'm going to loose feed some maggots because I know there's a lot of roach in here. And that'll just keep us entertained while hopefully the skimmers and bream settle out on the long pole. But I know for a fact that obviously, as I mentioned to you, there's no carp in here. So we've got nice light tackle. I've opted for a couple of simple rigs. The wind's not too bad, so I've gone for a Cypri float, 4 14s on my short line, but I might have to look at 4x12s to catch through the water, and then a 4 16s for the long line, so that I can actually just fish a nice delicate float and look for those sort of shy biting skimmers, especially when it's cold like this. They don't move a lot, so I've gone as light as I can, and we're just going to feel his way through and see if we can catch some fish on this cool sort of late winter's day. It's just starting, February is the time, and you know, the fishing is going to be probably quite difficult because of the cold weather, but let's see. So I've just shipped out onto in Andrew's words, my big peg, where I've fed some ground bait because we've not had a bite short, and I think that's probably due to how clear the water is, and because of that, my first chuck I've actually put on 2 fluoro pinkies because it's a brilliant sight bait in clear water. The fish will probably sitting off the bottom, and they just laid there suspended in mid-air, and I'm hoping that they're just going to dip down because I've seen that sort of bright hook bait, and we'll try and catch one of these skimmers, or hopefully one of its bigger brothers. There's a cool wind, and of course the water's cold and the fish will know that, and that would have bite off a small fish, so maybe there's no big fish there yet, because it's quite a normal scenario when you're fishing. It's probably worth remembering this, that if you're trying to target a swim where you're trying to attract bigger fish, more often than not, if you're getting bites off small fish, it means that there's no big fish there, and that's quite a common thing. So sometimes there's not a lot you can do about that. It might be that in summer you might need to feed more aggressively, because if the small fish are eating all your free offerings, then there won't be anything left for the bigger fish. But what I'm kind of going to say to you about the cold water fishing is that you can't keep piling bait in, so that's sometimes why it pays in winter to have more than one swim, because you need to be able to let the bigger fish settle. And you'll know when you go out there, because you won't get little bites, little indications and hooking small fish, because as the big fish come into the peg, they'll actually shoo away the smaller fish. So that's a great indication. And what we'll actually do is, if we persistently get small fish indications and missed bites, then what we'll do is we'll probably come back onto a short line and let that peg just rest. Because the other thing that big fish don't particularly like is disturbance and noise. You need to let them get the confidence and let them settle. So it's quite clear now that the Ide have moved in, and I think this is number 5. He's just woke up actually. Made a bit of an ash of that one. And as I said earlier, you can tell when there's a bigger fish in your peg, because those little fish just disappear. And I mean, cracking fish they are. I'm fishing double caster because I thought that would put off the small fish. I was sat there thinking, maybe it's one of those days where there are an odd big fish sat there, but sure enough I caught a small roach on it, and then I caught one about 3 ounces, and which obviously is not a big fish, but if you caught one a chuck all day you'd be quite happy. But then I lowered my rigging again and it sat without a movement, and sure enough I caught my first decent fish, which were actually a roach bream hybrid. And it just proved what I'd said, that you can tell, because the little fish just seem to be bullied out by the bigger fish. And I've caught, I think that's 4 or 5 of those big eyed and that hybrid. And sure enough, in between some of those eyed, I've had little dinks off little roach, and I've caught 1 or 2, but you lower your rigging and it sits dead still, and then you get your bite. And I'm still fishing just over depth with that 18 on, which is a nice small hook, and probably quite small for double caster. But the beauty of pole fishing is that if that you can, on a nice sort of light float that I'm using, you can see when the fish has took the bait, and you can set that hook and pull it through the casters. And I think if you can fish a nice small hook, it's certainly an advantage. I think it goes further into the mouth better, and I'm pretty convinced you get a better hook hold, because you've got, there's less hook to set. And I'm striking quite firmly because I'm fishing 5 foot deep, but I'm also using a 4 to 6 zip elastic, but I've only got that through one section, and it's actually handling these fish perfectly because there's not too much elastic where I'm not in control, but I can set that up nicely. And I'm predicting that we're probably going to catch another big fish because I've not had one of those sort of annoying little indications off a small fish. Now, obviously I initially fed with 3 pots of ground bait, which I made into sort of firm balls with a dampish mix, and I put an handful of casters into that because I didn't want to overfeed it at the start. But because I've had small roach and I've now caught a few big fish, what I've actually done is just wet up the ground bait a little bit more, and I've put a big handful of casters in that, so I can try and make what I'm calling quite a raw ball of casters. And I've made it wet because, despite what you might think, it seems sloppy. When you overwet a ground bait, and Joe Caris has proved this on his paste videos, when you saturate a ground bait with water, it means no more water can get in, which, despite how you might think, actually holds the ball together. So the reason I've done that is that that can carry as many casters as possible with as little ground bait as possible, and it's going to carry it down to the bottom and hold them casters and get them down to the deck without any small fish intercepting it, but more importantly not attracting them. Because ideally I'd like to loose feed casters, but because of these small fish I don't want to do that, and as the peg develops I might be able to adjust how I'm feeding, but I've potted that in and I've had 2 fish off it straight away. So that's obviously quite an effective way of getting some casters to the bottom in a nice neat ball, keeping everything nice and tight. So far it's an interesting day on what can only be described as a really interesting venue, and it's not every day you get the opportunity to fish this, and I can assure you if I owned it there'd only be me fishing it. But I know Andrew has invited his friends here in the past, and Roger himself has spent many a great day catching these fish. I mean, what an absolute pleasure to be the proud owner of something that's so special. And this is another hide, and they're pulling back lovely, they are. But you can see what I mean, I've not got too much elastic, but I've still got the softness of it without losing control. And you might have seen me do a strange thing there where I shipped me pole back behind me, and the reason I do that is because when I'm fishing quite a deep rig and it's longer than my top kit, which this is, it's just that bit longer than my top 2. What's the daisies? I'll tell you what, that is in the lip, that one. Look at that fish, that's beautiful, that is. It means that I wouldn't have enough control, and I'll just show you what I mean by that. So if I take off my number 3 section, or number 4 in old money, my rig is just that bit longer than my top kit, which means that if I were netting them fish I'd probably struggle to get them up, which means I'm having to use this number 3 section when I'm netting them. But that's a little bit too long, and when I pull that to full stretch I think it makes the elastic a bit tight. So by just bringing the fish around and shipping that number 3 section behind me like that, it shortens my kit, and then I pull it around like that, and then when it's under my feet I can push the top kit back up and I'm more in control. And it might look awkward, but what it allows you to do is bring the fish closer to you, because if you tried to pull the fish up with the whole kit that I'm using with this number 3 in, your fish would come up too far out and they'd be wallowing around on the top. And that were a sort of technique that I learnt from Alan Scotthorne fishing at Woolsbury Reservoir in Barnsley, because there you had to, it were quite deep, and the fish, you know, you needed to bring them in close. So it's a brilliant little tip for you if you're fishing in this kind of conditions. So I just want to talk to you a little bit more about what I mentioned when I was catching that fish about feeding the wet ball with the casters in it, because what I actually want to do really is feed loose casters, because that's clearly what the fish are looking for. That's what I'm catching on with the hook, but I want to introduce them to the swim. But because there's small fish here and lots of them, sometimes it's very difficult to put bait in, and it would, you know, you think, well, I want to get them to the bottom, and you can put them in loose, but I think that that will attract the small fish and encourage them, and I don't want to do that. So what I've actually done is wet up my ground bait really wet, and that means I can load it with casters. But what will actually happen is, even though it's a sloppy ball, you might think that's going to dissolve, but as I said, because it's absorbed the water, no more water can get in it, will actually pull those casters to the bottom and almost feed as raw a caster as you can possibly achieve. So that's a great little tip. And don't always think that you've got to have your ground bait in, if you like, the perfect fluffy mix that goes through your hands like a crumble. That's probably how you want it when you're feeding large amounts of ground bait. But if you're trying to get a small, precise and intense amount of food, which we're trying to do today, because don't forget, it's still cold, I'm trying not to overfeed them, but I want to focus them and concentrate them, that is a great way to feed your swim. It's quite a swirly wind, and because obviously we're in this small valley, we're getting a bit of a circular wind, and that's one of the reasons why I've left the line above my float a little bit longer than I might like, and that you'll see me just moving my pole either side of the float just as the wind direction changes. But one of the other reasons I mention that is that when I'm actually shipping out and laying my rig out, you'll notice that I'm actually holding my pole a little bit further up from where I'm sat now, which is right at the end of the 13 metre section. When I'm shipping it out, I'm kind of holding it here at 12 metres. So when I lay my rig out, because of the wind behind me, I don't want to be fishing too far past my bait. Now, it sometimes works really well to fish past your bait, but at this moment in time, it would appear that the fish are sitting right on top of that ground bait that we're putting in. So that's just a little thing that's probably worth noting. You know, when you watch things, it's think about when you're fishing tight, actually where your float is in comparison to where your feed is. So when I've tried to cut my ground bait in, I've kind of held my pole back a little bit, so that gives me ability to fish past my bait. But when I'm shipping my rig out and flicking it, I don't want, when it settles, I don't want it to be too far past, or in this case, because I'm laying it away from that aerator that's sat in the water, I don't want to finish up with my hook bait too far away from my ground bait. So just think about how your rig's laying and how it's settling, and what that means in relation to the end of your pole, because sometimes it's quite easy with that little bit of a longer lash that I've got on to obviously compensate for the wind, that you could finish up fishing off your bait. So just a little sort of pointer and a reminder just to be mindful, because when the fish are focused on your feed like these seem to be, then it's really important to make sure that you're fishing in your target area. Now, it's gone a little bit quiet, but I have fed another ball of ground bait and probably got a little bit excited, and I put sort of a big golf ball size in, whereas the previous one, it was more of a walnut, you know, and I might have overcooked it, or it might be that the fish have just backed off a little bit, because we had a cracking run there, catching a few of them big-eyed, and they're quite aggressive fish, and as I said, they cleared off the small fish, so maybe they've just pushed everything away. But it were indicating earlier that when I was sat waiting for a bite, it were always going to be a good fish. So don't be too concerned and don't take rash action, and just consider that, like me, you may have fed, and that might just take a little bit of time for the fish to return back to your swim. But if you don't keep feeding, sometimes you can lose the fish and you can't get them back. So experiment, but take notice of the reaction you get from your actions. So every time you do something, you always get a reaction from fish, and that can be positive and it can also be negative. So I'm not saying, you know, keep an exact scientific record of every single move you make, but it does pay to feel your way through and take note of what you've done. Sure enough, it were dead quiet, no small fish indications, and this feels like another one of these cracking eyed, which in this cold weather are just a pleasure to catch. This feels like a bigger one as well. I can see it actually. That just goes to show you how clear the water is here. I mean, it is winter and the water's freezing, all the algae's died, and the water clears up this time of year. So you'll just see what I'm doing again when I talk to you about just shipping that pole back, and especially with fish like eyed, which seem to loll about in a very sort of idle way. If you try to lift your pole up, you'd finish up with the fish flopping about out in the lake, and then just as it comes a bit closer, you can just lift it up, and sure enough, the fish is right in front of you in a prime position to slip your landing net under. A cracking little tip, and something I've found very effective for netting fish, not just more effectively, but you're going to get less up pulls and less disturbance, because if you were fishing a short line as well, you know, you won't want to be shipping your landing net right out over the top of them, because these, they're not carp. You can do that with carp because they seem to come to noise, but these fish are not particularly as adventurous, and I think you probably need to keep your swim quite peaceful. So just demonstrating what we do when there's rig length and the sections don't match up perfectly. So after catching that really cold eyed, I'm just going to warm myself up, because one of the advantages to fishing outside your kitchen window is that you get warm brews all day. Fantastic. So the swim's gone a little quiet, and the fish obviously reacted to that initial bait, and we've caught a few, and then it seems to have gone a little bit quiet. So I'm actually going to be a little bit brazen and just cup a sizable ball in. So that's like not a cup, massive cupful, but a good 2-hander, and I've laced that with casters. And I just try, I don't know if you noticed that, but I just try to hold my pole not right at the end, because I always like to feel that I feed on this side of where I'm fishing, so I'm always got the capability to just reaching past and fishing off the back of my bait if I want to, or I can hold my pole short and fish right on the top of it. So I'm just going to let that settle and fish that inside line for a little while, and see if we can snare a couple more of them big eyes, because they are fantastic. Oh, and sure enough, that has took quite a while, which, you know, on cold days like this it can happen. There were a proper feeding spree where we caught one after the other of these eyed, and then we didn't get any bites. And what's interesting is that none of them small roach were feeding either, which I think just proves that all the fish have switched off, because earlier when we were getting bites off roach and then they disappeared from the swim, and then we caught eyed, it just proved that the eyed were coming into the swim and bullying the roach out, because everything wanted to feed. But that's another one, and it were well worth waiting for, because they're absolutely stunning fish. I'll just lift that one up to show you. I mean, on a cold winter's day in this special venue in the back garden of a northwest house, you can't turn your nose up at fish like that, can you? So I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and hopefully I'll get the chance to come back to a fantastic place like this again soon, if not this place. In the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed what we've been doing and you've learned a few bits. Obviously, I tried to talk you through winter fishing, and it's turned out to be eyed. We're hoping to catch a few skimmers, but we're certainly not disappointed. But if you like this video, then please subscribe to our channel and have a look at some of the other great videos that we've got, which teach you a little thing or two about fishing.